Hi, everyone. Welcome in. We're excited to have you here today. As you guys are coming in, go ahead and pop into the chat. Let us know where you're from. You can let us know your role. We'd love to know a little bit more about you. And so, again, feel free to use the chat function and let us know where you're from. So we are going to go ahead and get started so that we can be respectful of your time. And so welcome to the webinar, and Teaching with Purpose, Empowering All Learners Through Action. And today, um, my name is Tawana Lawson, and I am here with my colleague Lisa Correll, and we are excited to be presenting this with you today. Both of us come with a background in healthcare, Lisa in particular, with a very strong background working with our public safety and emergency medicine. And so, again, we are very excited to have you guys here with us today, and we are just going to jump on into this. As we are going through, please feel free, use the chat. We want you guys to interact with us. Um, if you have questions or comments, anything like that, please, again, feel free to go ahead, chat with us as we're going along. We want to have interaction. If you have questions, again, we're going to do our best to keep our eye on things and to be able to answer your questions as we're going along. And we're also hoping to have a little bit of time at the end that we can dedicate to just answering some questions that you guys may have. So, today we're going to be talking about just different types of learning styles and what this looks like in our different learners. And what are some ways that you, as a person that is teaching, whether you're teaching in the classroom, if you have these students and they're with you in more of a clinical or on the truck, whatever it is, so that you have some ideas of how you can reach different types of learners. One thing that we know is we know that people learn various different ways. We all have different preferences, but we also understand that that we all have certain times that we have to learn a certain way. And so, not saying that one is better than the other, but it's nice to have a variety of ways to really kind of spice up, if you will, your teaching so that your students aren't necessarily bored. Those of us that have been in education for a while, we know sometimes things can get to be a bit of a drag. And so, our goal today is to give you a few ideas of some things that you can use as you are working with your students. And so again, we are going to be looking at learning, teaching, and learning strategies for students' preferences as we're looking at their looking at public safety information, public safety education. And so, as we're thinking about our adult learners, one thing that we know is that a lot of our students tend to be adult learners. Yes, we do have those students that are in high school that we have, but the vast majority of the students going into public safety are adults. And so, one thing with adults is they really need to know, why is something relevant? Why does this matter to me? What does this mean as far as professional development? What does this mean as far as my patients? And so being able to really pull in relevance is important when we're thinking about our adult learners. Also, as a way to do that, using scenario-based learning. So, scenario-based learning, this can be anything as simple as a case study, all the way up to high fidelity simulations. This can also be things like storytelling. Those of us that have been doing this for a while, we have some stories that we can tell that really help students see the importance of the information that we are teaching them. And again, part of our goal is for it to help them see meaning in what they're doing, but also helping them with their problem solving skills. We want to make sure that they're able to solve problems because, again, we don't know what we're going to run into. Your students don't know exactly what they're going to see. And so we need to give them an opportunity while they're with us to be able to have times where they can figure out, how do I solve this problem? What does this look like? What are, and all of the other what ifs. And so, by applying evidence-based information, again, real-world scenarios, our learners can make connections. And that's going to make learning more memorable. That is also going to help them, again, be able to hold on to that information, be able to apply it in those settings once they are, once in the settings, once they are out practicing. And so, thinking about relevance, relevance is generally related to five things. One, is it believable? So, one thing that I have always done with my students when I'm trying to make something relevant is to make sure that it's something that's actually believable. Even those times when I'm coming up with calculation problems, that's one of the things that I've always had to make sure that I was doing that was believable. Because if a student's doing a problem and they tell me they're going to give a patient 100 tablets of something, I can look at that student and say, okay, come on. When would you ever give someone that much medication? And so making sure, again, as we're coming up with these scenarios, as we're doing case studies, as we're even giving them practice problems, that it's believable. Relevance is also related to improved patient outcomes. That's why we do what we do. We really want to know that we're going to be able to impact the people that we're interacting with and that we're going to improve their outcomes. That's why we teach, so that we can teach others how to do that. That's why our learners are in our classrooms, so that they can go out, care for patients, care for those in the community, and also improve their outcomes. As a part of increasing outcomes and improved outcomes, our goal is also, of course, to decrease harm. So we don't want anyone harming someone, and we want to do as much as we can to make sure that we're able to decrease harm. So pulling that into those relevant scenarios and situations is always helpful. Another thing is frequency of task. Making sure when we are creating these scenarios or simulations or telling stories that it's about things that are going to be that our students, our learners are going to be doing in practice. What are things that they're frequently going to be doing? Because when they can say, oh, wait a minute, I need to know this because every day that I get on the back of a truck, there's a strong possibility I'm going to see this. That is going to be helpful for them. That is going to help them be able to relate that information and to really pull that out when they are taking care of patients. And then, of course, urgency of task. So when we're thinking about it, what are those most important things? You have all of this going on. How do we help them prioritize? And making that relevant again to what they're doing so that they understand the impact that they're going to have on others.
So relevance is so important when it comes to our adult learners. They are coming in with an existing amount of knowledge and they need to know how this is going to apply to what they're trying to do right now. So one of the activities that we have as a suggestion is doing like a ticket to class. So this is something that your students would do before they come to class. It will give them time to look at the material, really reflect on it, and then it will take your classroom time from just, teaching and helping them memorize to actually clarifying and discussing the material and then applying it. It also helps us as instructors identify where there might be maybe gaps in knowledge, or maybe a really difficult concept hasn't fully sunk in for our students yet. So for this ticket to class, we took one of our EMT chapters, airway management, and we pulled some of the big objectives out of this chapter. And then we're going to ask our students to provide answers to 4 questions that will help them go from just that memorizing, and I can recite it back to you, to actually making it relevant and applying it in the field. So, what would be one example of how knowing this information would improve a patient's outcome? What example would be something that if we don't know this, we might cause harm to our patient? In these scenarios, what is a task that you're going to perform frequently throughout this call? And then what is an example of a task that has to be performed in a timely manner or urgency? And that's something that we really prioritize when we're teaching with our students, is that problem solving, critical thinking. So they're making the best patient care decisions in the field. So this is an example of a ticket to a ticket to class. It is a graphic organizer, and it's something you can give your students to answer the 4 questions that we presented. So when it comes to airway management and specifically positioning an unconscious patient, how would this improve patient outcome? How frequently are we going to do this? If we don't position our unconscious patient in a timely manner or in the appropriate or correct manner, what could we do that could harm our patient? And then again, with that urgent and timely. For our graphic organizer, we also added a little circle in the middle because this reinforces the skill they have to learn. So now they're going to take this didactic knowledge that they're learning in the book and they're going to pair it with the skill and apply it in a situation.
And Lisa, I love doing these types of activities with students, and they're really simple. And honestly, a lot of even the things on the first page, you can pull that from just some of your student learning objectives that are at the beginning of a chapter or in another learning resource and use those, have your students reviewing those, and then tell them, okay, this is what I want you to do with this. And again, it does help them understand why what they're learning is relevant, why they're going to be using it. And then if you decide, hey, I want to be able to give some feedback on this, then this is a form of a rubric that could be used, again, just to give some feedback to the students. So depending on what that feedback is, again, just really quickly, you could give them feedback, give them some points on how they answered those questions. And it's a way, again, sometimes in making things relevant for students. Again, those of us that have been in education for a while, we also know that unfortunately, relevance is sometimes also tied to a grade. And for students, sometimes you have to grade some things, you have to be able to put a number to it to help them understand the importance of it. And so something like this, again, is just a simple rubric that can be used across any type of ticket to class. Or anything where you're using things about improving outcomes, frequent tasks, and urgent and timely things, and even just, hey, by the way, did you turn it in on time? Did you do it? Is it legible for me to read? But giving them a little bit of feedback. And I'm an instructor that I don't believe in, I believe in ticket for classes. Most of the time when I'm teaching, my students would always know, okay, if she's teaching, we're probably going to have a ticket to class and she's probably going to hit us with a pop quiz at some point. But while I may not give grades for everything, popping in and giving some grades for some things oftentimes help them stay engaged and help them also understand relevance. Another group of students that we like to talk about is those that learn well in groups. These are some of our students that prefer collaborative settings. Now, one thing that I will say about our fields dealing with healthcare, none of us are going out there doing anything on our own for the most part. We would absolutely not, in most cases, none of us really want to be the only person taking care of a patient. If you're going and you're on a fire call, you don't want to be the only person there. And so I am a really, really big proponent of helping your students work in groups, helping them learn, even if that's not their preferred learning preference, helping them learn in collaborative settings, because the reality is that's what we do on a daily basis. We really do not go out and just take care of people on our own. And so with this, we're thinking about the benefits that people, our learners can get from discussions, from team-based projects, that importance of that interpersonal communication. Because we know, one, we have to be able to communicate with each other as professionals, but we also have to be able to communicate with those that we're providing care for. And so this is a great opportunity when you are thinking about doing things in groups as to how can the student now take this and relate that to a patient. Most of the time, these learners are going to enjoy participating as a member of a team or group. And they appreciate having roles, as well as having others participate. And so, some personal characteristics of this type of learner are they're usually going to be really good at delegating and organizing. So, they can get there and say, hey, by the way, I'm going to work on this particular part. I want you to work on that. And then we're going to pull this together. And hey, by the way, can you edit at the end? And they're really going to be able to do that, which helps them also with conflict resolution skills. These are students that are often do a good job at brainstorming, coming up with new ideas. They oftentimes will have a low tolerance for those who do not contribute, which we have all had group projects before where that has been an issue. And we'll talk to you a little bit later about a way to kind of prevent that, but we know that it does happen. Sometimes these learners will also sacrifice for the benefit of others. And so that can, again, cause a little bit of burnout, a little bit of resentment. But again, we're going to give you some strategies for some of that. And so when we are thinking about these group learners, we want to encourage collaboration and discussion in small groups. So some examples of those types of things are online discussions to get a grade. So is that like just a discussion board? It could be. And it's them answering an assignment question before they can see others post, giving genuine feedback, asking a peer question. I have also updated this some with some of my learners because in the past, I have also done this where, depending on the LMS, if you're using an LMS with your school, you can have them to post videos. I have had students to respond to questions using videos before. That makes it a little more personal, requires them to do something besides just type something or copy and paste something because they have to actually be able to explain it. And again, it offers that little bit of connection. So if you are teaching a class that say is more online, in order to create a little bit of community, perhaps consider doing some type of video responses to a traditional discussion board or any other types of projects that you have your students doing.
In one of our flipped classroom activities, students have to create a rap song using terminology. And so that's another great way to get them involved in active learning as a group and collaborate together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, again, looking at this, um, this will, we can think about how to assign team-based projects and case studies. And so I'm going to let Lisa talk. She has lots of great examples for this one.
Funny. Um, so when it comes to team-based projects and getting people, to kind of break out of their element, I say it later in our presentation, but honestly, EMS, this is a team effort. So getting our students to really break out of their shells and work as a group, it involves kind of some creativity sometimes. So a lot of the things on this slide talk about some of the questions with our anchor study in a few minutes, but a couple of things I want to highlight with group things. I do a lot of graphic organizers in my classes. I also do Jenga. So I'll take a Jenga set and I will write protocols, pathophysiology terms, medications, and then I will let my class run with that. But the caveat is when you pull a Jenga block, you now have to teach your classmates that entire concept. So that's been a really great one for my class. Another one that I use for group learning to get them to teach each other is a soccer ball, and I will write concepts on each area of the soccer ball. That also helps keep them awake because they don't want Mrs. Curl to hit them in the head with a soccer ball when they fall asleep. So, yes,
Absolutely.
Jenga. I saw the question there. Like the wooden block puzzle, and you have to pull them out and stack them on top. It's great in my fire classrooms because, as we know, firefighters for sure were super competitive. So that was always a great one to get them involved.
Absolutely. I love that idea again about getting them involved. And it's a different way to do it. I've also used you use the soccer ball. I've used the beach ball before. I was a little nicer. But you never knew when the beach ball was going to come across the room and whatever that, whatever you landed on, your right hand or left hand landed on, like, yeah, you were going to have to participate. And again, you could use these types of questions that are up here, and you don't even have to necessarily go into details because if you're covering a specific content area or a disease process or anything like that, if you just put something about what are the most common diagnostics, that could relate to anything. And you could really do that. But yes, I love Lisa's Jenga idea, and I will say Jenga will be coming to a classroom that I am in very soon.
So this is an example of kind of that traditional PowerPoint that many of us are used to in the classroom lecture environment. It has all the great information, it has the key points, and it'll help you pass a test if you memorize the whole thing. But when we go back to relevance, and then one of the biggest things that we hear instructors and things I've experienced in the classroom is application. How do we get our students to think critically, problem solve, apply that knowledge? This isn't necessarily as memorable. This doesn't have a story behind it. It doesn't give students that meaning, that like integration that we're looking for when it comes to knowledge. So one of the ideas that we have on the next slide is making a scenario map or kind of like a concept map. And so for this one, I took some of the questions that we just went over a little bit on the group learning slide. And you can take a common case study condition, something, we're all familiar with, in this case, EMS education, airway management. And you can give them like a really brief scenario and then have your students go through and answer what are the most common risk factors with this disease process or this scenario? What are some of the most common diagnostics that we need to perform? What about treatments? What should we anticipate when it comes to complications? So an example of this would be if you have a CHF or a full of fluid and we give them a breathing treatment without positive pressure, like that's a huge one that we need to anticipate. What are some early symptoms of the complication? So now we're getting our students to think ahead and pre-plan like what they need to do. What are some next steps to consider? So all of these things help students kind of prioritize their thinking. It helps them with, hey, I really need this information, but this information over here is it would be really nice to know, but I don't need it right this second. And then it will also pull them back into that real world practical knowledge, makes it relevant and kind of makes it make sense.
And I love that because, again, when we were thinking about it, one of my colleagues has said before, and I love her comment about helping students to prioritize how you have the need to know, which we know is our safety things. And then we have the nice to know, which is, yeah, that could be really good that could be nice to know. And then what she calls nuts to know, which is why it's a random fact. That's great, but really and truly, that's not really what we're going to be doing on a daily basis. And so her thing is always need to know, nice to know, and then just nuts to know.
I love that. So this one is an example of a completed graphic organizer flow chart. I love that Perry put in the chat, looks like a flow chart. Yeah, kind of, we are all used to that in EMS, our guidelines, flow charts, protocols, etc. So this one gives an example of a 65-year-old male. He has acute onset difficulty breathing. And so this is the twist to it. He also has a history of COPD and CHF. So now we have to get our students to really think critically so they can rule in or out which condition may be exacerbating these symptoms. So on here, we've got some risk factors. We had our students list out the complications that, hey, we need to really anticipate. They might be decreased mental status. If they already have a tired heart, now the heart's working harder to get oxygen through the body. All of these things are great ways to get our students to kind of put all of the parts and pieces that we're teaching them throughout the semester into one scenario and make it relevant.
Absolutely. And so one of the things that I mentioned earlier is, sometimes with group activities, getting students like to participate can be a little bit of a challenge. And so one of the things that I would love to suggest is doing a teamwork rubric. So if you know for sure that you're going to be, particularly if it's something for a larger project, that you're going to have your students working in teams, then having a rubric there. Do they participate in group discussions? Effectively work to keep the discussion moving, actively shares ideas, gives credit to others, involves others by asking questions and requesting input. And obviously, you as the instructor can do this, but I have also had used this and had my students rate each other if they were going to be working together as a group. And so then essentially they could have the feedback from me as their instructor, but also from their peers, which would always help keep them accountable because I would tell them straight up, right forward, don't just give someone high scores because, oh, I want everybody to have a good grade because ultimately I'm paying attention as the instructor. We're not going to do that. Like, we're going to make sure that we are giving good feedback because, again, when we're working together, we oftentimes have to give each other feedback. And that feedback is not always positive. So you need to learn now how to be able to really give really good feedback.
Give and receive good constructive feedback because receiving it can be a challenge for our students too.
Yeah. And we did have a question about if there was a template. I think they were talking about for the previous slide. And I want to say, Lisa, that was something that you developed.
It is. Yes, mine will definitely be the ones that are super color coded. The next slide talks about visual learners. That's me. But no, I can absolutely send out the template to whoever.
Yeah. So we can absolutely do that. And we're also going to be sending out this PowerPoint slides as well. And so you guys will have those as well.
So our visual learners, like yours truly, these are people that are students that really can visualize a concept. They learn from diagrams, charts, graphs, not just reading a book or seeing something on a PowerPoint slide. These students often, they'll be the ones in your classroom that you'll see will take really detailed notes. They will add pictures to those notes. They'll highlight. All of my notes in paramedic school were color coded. It helps their brain kind of trigger different concepts for different things. Um, at times, your students can struggle with verbal instructions because they're not just a solely like auditory learner. So, having them sit in a chair and listen to you talk at them for 8 hours might not be the best way they're going to pick up information. So with these students, sometimes their clothes and accessories tend to be trendy and match. Um, they will also be because they're so detail oriented with their notes, they'll see details that maybe other people won't pick up on. They'll pick up on patterns or one of the things I always say to my students is one of these things is not like the others, like Sesame Street, because you pick up on a pattern. They'll make connections between things. They're really good at organizing activities. They'll follow written directions more than verbal instruction. And they really enjoy the what, like, what am I learning and what am I going to use this for? So, some techniques when it comes to your visual learners in your classroom, charts, diagrams. We talked in the chat. I see mind maps is another great one. I have a concept map coming up. Anything that's really visual. Students will label and match whenever possible. Anatomy coloring pages. This is a good one for those learners that have to actually put their hands, those kinesthetic learners. They need to put their hands to something to really put it into their mind. Color coding is always a great one. They like to categorize things. Another big one is learning to kind of find similarities and differentiating between things. This is something that I use quite often when I teach respiratory conditions because so many of them overlap. And so, something that's really good for these learners is to help them see, hey, the differences between this condition and this condition is XYZ. So kind of helping them put together the likenesses will also help them. Really encourage these students by taking notes, color coding their notes, creating concept maps, flow charts, graphic organizers. All of these things are great for your visual learners.
And I love that you said about color coding your notes. That is one strategy that I have used a lot with students in the past. Whether it's their notes and even their textbooks, I've had my students if they really struggle with things and colors can mean something to them, okay, when we're looking at signs and symptoms of something, highlight that in green. So from this point forward, anytime that you see green, you know it's going to be signs and symptoms of this. Have them highlight risk factors or something else in orange, and just having them to have that so that it would just become one of these things that when they saw those colors, that would be something they could automatically associate with signs and symptoms or something else. And so, again, as Kevin said, passes out highlighters the first night of class. Absolutely. And students sometimes feel like, oh, that's such a small thing, but it makes such a big difference for students. And if they can understand that and do that while they're taking while they're taking notes, then that also becomes something when they're taking their test. It just becomes another reminder of, oh yeah, that was a green thing. That was an orange thing. I remember that now. And it helps them again, even in their test taking strategies.
It's like making those connections for them.
Yeah. So this again is just another photo of one of the last ones, but of the students just labeling and color coding because again, we know that while yes, we want to get down to the actual patient care, our students do need to understand the anatomy and physiology, some of the pathophysiology, and this is a way to kind of root some of that. And again, in your programs, they're going to have to take anatomy and physiology. Depending on the program, you may be the person even teaching that course. And so, again, just an idea for you there.
So this next one, this concept map, this is truly one of my favorite ways to teach. I use this in almost all of the classes that I teach. And you can present a concept map in multiple ways. So here in our presentation, we talk about using a PowerPoint format to where you have different colors on separate topics. This goes to both your visual learners and your kinesthetic learners. You can have students give them a blank piece of paper and they can draw out their own concept map while you're going through this. One of the things that I really like to do with these though is I would print out several blank ones and hand them out to my students, and I would give them, so for this one, shortness of breath. And then I want them to come up, the big bubbles, all the conditions that would cause a patient to feel short of breath. And then the little bubbles, I would challenge them. Okay, so what's your first line treatment? What's a complication of that? What diagnostics do you like that nice to know, need to know, nuts to know information? And you can make these as complex or as simple as you like. My paramedic students, by their third semester, they would have quite large concept maps just because I would make them branch out to all the things. It really helps kind of that critical thinking and then coming up with your differential diagnosis so you know which protocol you need to follow or which path you're going to go down with your patient.
Yep. And this can be, again, it can be presented in so many different ways. I've had students where we've done this via PowerPoint. I've had them literally that it's there on the wall with pieces of paper and they're putting that up there on the wall and having to kind of create their own puzzle. And so there are so many different ways that a student can do this. But again, it is really down to helping them prioritize and pick out those most important things because we only have a few circles. And I always tell my students, I don't want to see everything that could ever possibly happen. If we're talking about pharmacology, unless it's a GI medicine, I don't want to hear nausea and vomiting because everything causes nausea, vomiting, and diarrhea. That's just what it is. Don't tell me that. Tell me something else. What are those top two or three things that are really, really important for you to know? And so we have a case study here. And so again, being able to pull in these things that are relevant. And so this is just an example of a case study from one of the resources. And it's just saying that, you're outside. It's a warm summer day, decent temperatures, sitting with your partner. And then a call comes in. There's a university ambulance to responded to the lobby of Maple Tree Hotel for a man with respiratory distress. And one of the things we think about is approximately one out of every four EMS calls is going to be for airway or respiratory distress and respiratory related. And so these are questions that are here that could really help you take that one little bit of that scenario and have your students to dig into this. What are things that are critical to maintain that patient's airway? How frequently should they be assessing the condition, assessing that airway and their ability to breathe? What impact will inappropriate assessment or management have on that patient's airway? So again, helping them pull all of those pieces together through something like a case study is extremely helpful. With case studies, there are times that if it's a case study similar to this one, where it's not really an unfolding case study, that I will have students in different groups. Maybe they're assigned a particular question, and then they have to discuss it, that kind of thing. Maybe we write on boards, on giant post-it notes, all of that kind of stuff will also help. I see Adam, I love this. Being able to provide real data from your area of operations seems to help a lot with buy-in. It does. It makes it relevant for them because this is actually something that is happening in this area. This is not something random that we're seeing across the country somewhere, but again, it's in this area.
So, another way that you can really get these group projects going is to have different topic ideas and create groups, small groups, and then assign them. And so then students, whether you want them to answer questions, one through whatever, or in this case, you could have them prepare like a graphic organizer and now have them get up and teach the class about their topic idea. We tend to remember a lot more of what we teach than when we're just absorbing it. But when we have to actually explain it to someone and make it understandable for someone else, the knowledge tends to stick a little bit more. So these are some ideas coming from chapter 11 in our EMT product. With the respiratory airway management chapter. And I've broken them up into 3 groups here. So I might have one of my groups just work on what all do we need to know, what would be nice to know, or what would be nuts to know when it comes to how we're going to assess this patient. I have another group working on the physiology of breathing. So really talking about like the mechanics of it, because then that helps us understand how these disease processes might present or what challenges and complications our patients may have. And then with the final group, I had them work on skills. So, how do we position these patients, or what kind of equipment? You can even have them demonstrate that skill to the rest of the class and then practice it with each other.
Absolutely. So then we have our auditory learners, the learners that learn by listening and by speaking. And so whenever we're thinking about this, these learners are able to interpret meaning from tone, pitch, the speed of speech, and they benefit from verbal repetition, discussions. They're also going to learn well with contextualized content. So thinking about case-based learning, again, something else that we have talked about. And so thinking again, case studies, simulations, these clinical type assignments, and clinical doing pre-briefing, same thing with simulation, pre-briefing and debriefing. Let's talk about what we think is going to happen. As someone who's done quite a bit of simulation, I would always have my students to do pre-briefing. And initially, they always didn't understand, but I'm like, no, I'm going to give you just a general overview, just a little snippet of what we're going to be doing today. And I want you to tell me what you anticipate is going to happen. And then, as a part of our debriefing, we could talk about what actually happened there. Because again, it would help them think through their priorities, how those priorities had to shift when they got into the simulation or with their patients. And so that's one of the things that I've done with students before. And honestly, I've done it with like different color markers or highlighters where I'll have them write maybe in purple at the beginning of the pre-briefing what they think is going to happen, and then after the simulation or something like that, okay, now come back with a green marker and write what actually happened, what was actually going on there. And so those things are helpful. It is important to know that these learners can be easily distracted by noise or by silence. These learners will enjoy speaking, engaging, and inspiring enthusiasm in others. They're typically influential and they enjoy the why. They want to know the why of planning, of learning. Why do I need to know this? Which again goes back to relevance. As we are thinking about this, we are also thinking about encouraging verbal explanations and discussions. These are the students that they would love me as an instructor because I ask why. Some of my students hate it, but they know if you ever answer a question, the next thing that's coming out of my mouth is why. Even if it's multiple choice and you tell me that B is the correct answer, that's great that B is the correct answer. But can you tell me why that's the correct answer? And really having them to give me the why, to explain information. And sometimes, again, them being able to explain it to different populations, to different patients that they're going to take care of. So thinking about a pulse ox. How would you explain that to someone who has a sixth grade literacy or reading level? Versus how would you explain that to a colleague? Because you wouldn't talk to one of your healthcare professional colleagues in the same manner that you would someone, at least I hope not, someone that has a sixth grade reading level. So how would you explain that? Thinking about things like an inhaler, how do you explain that to a child that's 8 years old? Because again, it could be a respiratory thing and you're out on a call and you need to help that child use that inhaler. And also, again, you can have the students to do this in a group activity where one group is explaining or teaching something to a child versus the other group is teaching it to an older adult. Maybe somebody else is teaching it to someone that's visually impaired. And so you can give them these different options there so that they can really like think through what are the differences, but how do I still get the same message across while respecting that I can't say the exact same thing to absolutely everybody.
So, our auditory learners, this is another great way to help them put concepts together and then to remember things. So, mnemonics and rhymes. And I'm sure all of us remember some kind of a rhyme, a song, something that helped us years and years ago, and it's still stuck in our brain. One of mine would be lemon when we're looking at airways, or even, I don't know if you guys remember the old KED one, my baby looks hot tonight, for how we put the straps on a KED. So, and that was like 20 years ago, and I still remember it. So here's a couple of easy, mnemonics. One, breath slow every five, watch the chest and keep them alive. Or even with our EMTs or AEMTs that are doing supraglottic airway, rods, looking for restricted mouth opening, obstruction in the airway, a distorted airway, or a stiff neck. All of these things are great for auditory learners because they help things stick even 20 years later, even when we don't use KEDs anymore, right?
They absolutely do. And I will say that is still one of the best ways to learn so many things is by mnemonics. Like you said, even when you're not using something anymore, it's still like, oh, yeah, there we go. I remember that. And so, again, here's an unfolding case study. And Lisa, I'll let you take this one away.
So, with this unfolding case study, what we have is a two-part scene, and this is going to be great for even preparing students for national registry, where they have to look at a scenario and prioritize tasks. So, for this one, we're going to start with we're en route to a hotel, and we're looking at potential causes of respiratory distress. Could it be asthma or a heart attack? So, now thinking back to that concept map we made about shortness of breath, we're going to think about all these different things, and then also, we're going to be really happy that today we decided to check our truck the way we were supposed to. So, a couple of the questions that we want our students to start looking at first is what are the causes? So now we could bring in our concept map to this. What kind of equipment do we think we're going to need? And that goes back to that diagnostics and finding the information we need to know. So once our students answer those questions, work through them maybe as a group and present them, then we can give them the second part of the scene. As we get there, we're greeted by the hotel security. A man that was attending this conference began complaining of difficulty breathing, and now he's confused. And then he passed out in his chair. Um, so we're going to go through, have our students read the context of it, and then we want to know, like, ask our students, how does this information they gave us prepare us for our patient? So now they have to think critically about the information they've been given and start prioritizing tasks. They need to also consider potential hazards in this situation. It's a crowded room. Maybe they need to worry about where, like, their location, just different things, and have them work together to present that.
And so, getting back over, we've talked a little bit about our kinesthetic learners before, but kind of getting back into that, these are our hands-on learners. And I would bet a lot that a lot of our learners that are in our areas, this is what they are. This is just what I tend to see more frequently is these are the students that enjoy doing. They want to get their hands dirty. They want to get their hands moving and doing things. They enjoy those hands-on activities, the real-world applications. These are students that role-playing, projects, simulations are always going to be really helpful for them. Some of the other more passive learning methods, such as lecture, would could be very more of a struggle for these students. Again, a lot of times these students are going to be active. They enjoy the physical activity,
Uh-oh, did we
grading
lose Scott?
tasks, and they're open to volunteering in class. They are coming up with alternatives, and they also enjoy the how of learning.
So with kinesthetic learners, we talked about some of these things before with like the Jenga, different games. I have found that my students really like game-based, interactive, active learning, putting the whole concept of student-led learning more than just me standing in front of a classroom and talking. You can use simulations, and it doesn't have to be anything crazy. I've done escape room simulations that we didn't go to other rooms, but they had to solve the puzzles and think critically, and then I would give them the next clue after they unlocked it. So there's a lot of different things that you can do. You can do case-based learning projects like we just talked about. You can have students create physical models or displays of content. So have them create a set of lungs out of some 2 liter bottles. There's lots of really cool science, like science-based experiments that you can incorporate into EMS education.
Okay.
So these are just some more examples of things that you can do with your kinesthetic learners. Like Ty mentioned earlier, having video chats with your students, having them load a video, it makes it a lot more personal. You can also have them demonstrate a procedure or a technique. One thing I found when it came to video demonstrations and doing scenarios, if we record our students and then we let them watch it back, they are so much harder on themselves than I would ever be, but they start to really connect that knowledge and see where, oh, if I had done it this way, and they see different potential outcomes. Um, the at-home experiments and projects like the lungs and different things, you can, if you're doing a fully online course or even a hybrid course, you can have virtual breakout rooms for small group discussions. And then you could come back together in the main group and have each group present. Encourage movement. So have your students stand up, walk around. It also keeps them awake during class, but these students really need to be active and involved.
They do. And you mentioned online learning, and I love online learning for students, especially when we have both components, because they can learn online and they can have that as kind of their base, if you will, of information. And then when they come to class, this is when we get to implement all of this type of stuff. So, still using all of those online resources, doing that for your students is kind of their pre, if you will, work before they come to class. And that way they come in and they have a better understanding. And then you can really implement these things a lot more easily.
So, with the skills drills, this is something that we are all really familiar with in EMS and fire education is teaching our students um, how to perform the different tasks they're going to do in the field. So, we can have students review skills videos, and then this could be a ticket to lab. We talked about a ticket to class, and now you have one to come to lab. So, they can get their skill sheet, their checkoff sheet, and they can work on that and perform it with each other and go through it. The other great thing with this is you can use this with your instructors and preceptors as well. That way, you have a consistent process across all of your adjuncts or your preceptors, making sure students are getting the same information and they're not all doing it a little bit differently. I'm sure as EMS educators, we have all heard, well, my preceptor on the truck said this doesn't matter, but this is a great way to get everyone on the same page for your students.
Absolutely. Love things like that that help us all stay aligned. So another idea is this is a something we call an active learning template, and it is something another way to look at skills. And so when we are thinking about a skill, you can have a student to essentially fill this out. What is the name of the skill? Have them to develop a little bit of a client story. So, what's the client? What's the patient that you would probably need to perform the skill? And then what are some of the expected results? What are some of the safety precautions that you would need to be thinking about? What are some actions that need to be taken? Again, what are complications? The most common, not something really far out that can happen, but what are some of the most common things that you could see? What are things that you would want to teach this client? And so having students do something like this encourages that critical thinking. Again, you can have them to do this as a pre-class assignment. You can have them to do it in class. If you have larger classes and you really need to think about, okay, I need to divide them to have one part doing something while the other part maybe is doing something else. I have used things like this so that those that are waiting to come do the hands-on thing, they can be working on this and it's still skill related. And so, an example would be, let's say we have an EMS student or a paramedic that's going to be working in an emergency department. Because we know that that's one of the places now that we're seeing our EMS and paramedic folks at. And so maybe they say they need to assist the client to ambulate. They need to help that client get up and walk. They can absolutely create a client story. If they're going to be working in that inpatient, well, the hospital setting, they're probably going to need to be familiar with SBAR because that's something, again, they're going to hear over and over. So you can even incorporate things like communication and how to communicate into this by telling them, hey, I want you to put this in SBAR format for me. And they can do that and then fill this out. And yes, this has quite a bit of font and text on it, but you can have your students, okay, I want three, no more than three bullet points per box. And you can have them to absolutely do this and use this as a way, again, to reinforce those skills, to make sure that it's feeling relevant to them, as well as just ensuring that they're learning and they're going to be able to, and that they're going to be able to apply that once they're out in the real world. And so, in summary, we've got about 4 minutes left. We're pushing it. We want to make sure that we are, again, recognizing from our students exclusion. We want to make sure that we are including all of our students. And so, again, as we're thinking about all the different ways to learn, the different ways that our students learn, that we are may incorporating a lot of this, that we're learning how to incorporate this and the different learning styles that are there, because those are things that just make us different. That we all learn different. That's one of the ways that make us diverse. And then one of my biggest things is when we solve for one student, so you have that one student that needs something, typically speaking, you're going to be extending that to many students. Because while you have that one student that you know has this particular thing or they enjoy learning a particular way, chances are you have some others in your classroom that this is also going to be really, really good for. They just haven't spoken up to let you know that yet. All right, so that is the end of our presentation, but we've had several questions, and I've been trying to answer quite a few of them we've been going through in our Q&A. And so a lot of the questions are about, are you going to get a copy of this? Yes, our plans are to send out an email with a copy of the presentation. We can include some of the templates in there. I know someone asked about contact information. We can get together and get all of that stuff together so that we can share it with those of you that registered for this webinar. And we are so happy to have you here. We appreciate everything that you guys have talked about in the chat. If you guys have any quick questions, we have just a couple of minutes. If you can type it in a couple of minutes, go for it, and we will do our best to get you a quick answer. You guys are absolutely welcome. We
Yes.
enjoy doing this. We're both educators, and so this is something that we really, really enjoy doing. There is not, I see a question about a CME. We do not have that associated with this webinar, unfortunately, not right now. All right. Well, thank you all very much for your time and for your attention. We're getting a couple questions. Is there a Facebook group for JBL instructors? I am not
I
aware. Are you aware of one, Lisa?
I am not. I think that that's definitely a great idea, something we should explore because I do think resource sharing when it comes to educators is phenomenal. Ty and I talked about this a little earlier. A lot of us come to education from healthcare backgrounds without having taught before or having formal educator experience. So I think it's a great idea to start something where we can all support each other, share templates, concept maps, all that fun stuff.
Yeah. And then we had one other question about young adults with learning disabilities. This is a whole different group of students, and we are seeing these students more and more, Juan, in our programs. And so, one of the things that I always recommend is looking at what that student needs, because a lot of the support that you can give that student, so helping them with note taking, helping that student organize, those are things that you can also help all of your students with. But I will say, over the next little bit, this is a conversation across some of our other business units as well. We are looking at some webinars specifically for our students with learning disabilities and those types of things. Um, yeah, one of these for focused on fire service? Absolutely. Absolutely. We will absolutely consider doing that. I love it. Love that idea.
I love all the enthusiasm and suggestions. This is great.
It is. Well, thank you all so much. We are at time. I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.